The Icarus Station was humanity's silent promise to the future. A vast orbiting cryo-vault designed to hold 20,000 colonists in suspended animation for a 300-year voyage to Kepler 186f. Dr. Lena Hansen was the sole waking technician, spending her years in the deafening quiet, surrounded by rows of glass-fronted freezers holding frozen lives. The silence was the first monster. Then came the cold. One cycle, the environmental controls dipped below protocol. Nothing catastrophic, just a momentary fluctuation. But Lena noticed a change in the sleepers. They were not just frozen, they were dreaming. Her console logged rapid, synchronized neural activity across all 20,000 units. The life support monitors showed panic spikes, rapid eye movement, and muscle spasms, all while the bodies remained locked in cryogenic stasis. The energy spike was massive, almost impossible for a sleeping mind. Lena started monitoring the neural feed. At first, it was static. Then it began to resolve into images. Not individual dreams, but a shared, collective nightmare. She saw impossible architecture, non-Euclidean angles, and vast, swirling fields of purple light. She realized the collective minds of the colony had become a singular, terrifying psychic antenna. The dreams intensified. The frozen faces began to mirror the terror of the images on her screen. Then the console's printer, which was only used for error reports, started printing. Not code, but sheet music. Dozens of pages of complex, alien sheet music, smelling faintly of ozone and metallic dust. Lena, a hobbyist musician, began playing the notes on her ship's synthesizer. The moment the first chord was struck, the neural activity spiked to dangerous levels. The console screamed a warning: system integrity compromised, external entity detected. As she played the final dissonant chord, the sound seemed to resonate not just through the speakers, but through the hull itself. She looked up at the Cryo-Vault window. The exterior vacuum of space was impossibly distorted, shimmering as if viewed through a bath of oil. And then one of the frozen faces inside the glass, that of a young man named Commander Kale, opened its eyes. They were not Kale's eyes. They were wide, black, and perfectly flat, reflecting the light of the Cryo-Vault in dozens of unsettling facets. The commander's unit began to vibrate violently. The glass shattered outward, releasing a plume of vapor, but the body did not fall out. Instead, the entity inside reached out, not with a hand, but with a long, bone-white, segmented tendril that materialized from the steam. It was reaching for the sheet music. Lena scrambled to grab the music, tearing it into fragments. As she did, the tendril retreated, and Kale's unit sealed itself with a crack of ice. The black eyes vanished. Lena is now alone on the Icarus Station. The music pages are gone, completely dissolved. But every night, when the light shifts, she sees a tiny, impossibly black segment of bone lodged underneath the synthesizer's lowest C key. She knows the creature that dreamed itself into existence is not gone. It is simply sleeping again. And sometimes when she walks past the vault, she hears a faint, dry, scraping sound, as if 20,000 people are simultaneously scratching the inside of their glass prisons, trying to write the music again. This log was retrieved from a derelict space freighter whose final jump coordinates were found set to a non-existent star system. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the ancient folklore of Central Europe, where the deepest evil is not supernatural, but purely human. In the remote peat bogs of the Netherlands, a preserved Iron Age corpse, a Bog-Body, was discovered by workers excavating land for a new wind farm. Local legend warned that these bodies were guardians, bound by powerful ancient rights to the earth. Taking them was to court the Earth's vengeance. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Ilara Veen, dismissed the warnings. The body, perfectly preserved, hair still red, skin like leather, was named Reuben and was taken to a nearby converted farmhouse for study. The horror began with the house itself. It was old, drafty, and smelled perpetually of wet, acidic peat, the scent of the bog. Ilara began experiencing severe paranoia, convinced the villagers were watching her. She started talking in her sleep, but the language was not Dutch or English. It was a rough, guttural dialect not heard for 2,000 years. Her assistant, Marcus, noticed the body was changing. Though stored in a climate-controlled environment, Reuben's facial features were subtly softening, his lips appearing less withered, his eyes seeming to sink deeper. It looked less like a corpse and more like a very sick, very old man. One night, Marcus found Ilara standing over the body, holding a rusted ceremonial dagger. She was chanting in the ancient dialect, her voice raw and powerful. Her face held a cold, malevolent focus, a focus that was utterly alien to her. She claimed the Bog-Body was speaking to her, demanding its land back. It promised her great wealth and influence if she would only complete the ancient rite that bound the body to the earth. Marcus, horrified, tried to reason with her. He noticed Ilara's skin had taken on the color and texture of the Bog-Body. It was taut, leathery, and subtly darkened. The possession was not spiritual, it was cutaneous, a horrifying transfer of matter and will. He watched in frozen terror as the Lara, driven by the ancient spirit, began the final ritual. She took a small pot of the acidic peat soil and carefully began to apply it to her own face, covering her features one by one, sealing the possession. He realized he had to destroy the physical tie. He grabbed a lantern and smashed it, igniting the room in flames. He grabbed the Bog-Body, intending to burn it and break the cycle. But as the flames raged, Ilara did not run. She simply stood, completely covered in peat, and let out a sound that was less a scream and more a satisfied, wet sigh, the sound of earth claiming its due. She then calmly walked straight into the roaring flames. When the fire department contained the blaze, they found the farmhouse destroyed. They found two things: Ilara's body, completely reduced to dry ash, and the Bog-Body, Reuben, sitting perfectly preserved on the charred remnants of the table. Reuben looked younger. His skin was soft, his lips were full, and his hair shone with a healthy copper sheen. The most terrifying discovery was not in the ash, but in the soil. Where Ilara's body had fallen,
A fresh patch of living green grass had sprung up instantly, growing through the charred floorboards. This report was recovered from the Dutch National Archives, listed under unexplained soil contamination and spontaneous vegetative growth. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the toxic underbelly of the internet, where a demonic entity uses the ultimate tool of modern paranoia.
In a modern American city, a specific fringe news network called Fax News became the focus of intense, unexplainable paranoia. Viewers of the network weren't just angry, they were experiencing acute auditory and visual hallucinations, severe social paranoia, and a terrifying inability to distinguish between broadcast reality and physical reality. Investigative journalist Mia Chen started monitoring the network after her uncle, a devoted viewer, claimed his refrigerator was mocking him. Mia believed it was a sophisticated psychological warfare campaign. She studied the broadcasts. The graphics were cheap, the presenters unremarkable. But she isolated a recurring visual pattern. A tiny, single-frame Enochian-style sigil, flickering on-screen for a millisecond, always over a presenter's shoulder. It was a perfect subliminal implant. Mia found a retired broadcast engineer, Arthur, who explained the network's technology was archaic, using low-frequency signals usually filtered out. He confessed that the network owner had hired him years ago to deliberately remove the signal filters and amplify these sub-audible frequencies. He called it the binding tone. The final broadcast was scheduled for midnight, a special announcement that promised to simplify the truth. Mia and Arthur raced to the transmission center, an old repurposed water tower on the edge of the city. Inside the tower, the single broadcast room was chaos. The main anchor, a clean-cut man named Ted, was sitting perfectly still reading the teleprompter. But the feed on the monitor showed something different. Ted's face was warped, his eyes pitch-black voids, and his voice was a deep, layered resonance that vibrated the metal walls. Mia realized the signal wasn't just influencing the audience, it was possessing the anchor and the broadcast equipment itself. The sigil on the screen was a vessel, and the low-frequency binding tone was the key. Arthur, trembling, pointed to the teleprompter. The text was no longer news, it was a rhythmic Latin chant. The final line translated to, "And the broadcast shall be the body, and the audience the blood." As the clock ticked to midnight, the anchor Ted stopped reading. He looked directly into the camera, and his black void eyes began to leak. Not tears, but a thick, oily fluid that stained his shirt. Then the tower's huge satellite dish outside began to move violently, spinning faster and faster, emitting a high-pitched metallic shriek. The room lights exploded. In the sudden darkness, Mia heard Arthur gasp. He wasn't looking at the anchor, he was looking at the monitor screen, which was now pitch black. But across the blackness, a single, large sigil of dripping, oily fluid was slowly bleeding onto the glass, burning into the screen itself. Mia fled the tower just as the satellite dish tore free from its moorings and crashed to the ground. She was later told the tower had been hit by a freak electrical storm. But Mia knows the truth. She carries a small handheld TV in her pocket now. It remains off, but sometimes when she holds it, she can feel a faint, steady vibration, the sound of the binding tone still resonating, waiting for the signal to be repaired. This journalist still carries the small handheld TV. She claims that whenever she puts it in water, the liquid turns instantly oily and black. Now, let's move to the next story. One that came from the deepest pits of Gothic horror, where the obsession with beauty leads to a consumption of the self.
Elias Thorne was an acclaimed artist whose career had vanished after a scathing critique called his work derivative and worthless. Consumed by a desire for validation, Elias found a single, antique book bound in what looked suspiciously like human leather. The book was titled The Art of the Final Canvas. The text contained a detailed, terrifying ritual, promising the artist absolute self-perfection and validation, but only through a profound act of self-consumption and transference. The ritual required creating one final perfect self-portrait, painting it not with oils, but the artist's own flesh. Elias began. He would surgically remove tiny, thin layers of his own skin, blend the tissue with a solvent, and use the resulting viscous medium to paint the canvas. With every stroke, his portrait grew impossibly realistic, vibrant, and alive, while Elias himself withered. His girlfriend, Clara, witnessed his rapid, gruesome transformation. His weight plummeted, his skin became translucent, and his voice thinned to a whisper. Yet Elias never stopped smiling. He called it the Great Shedding. When the portrait was finally complete, it was sublime. The subject, Elias's painted self, was impossibly handsome, robust, and radiating a powerful, hungry confidence. The eyes seemed to follow Clara as she moved. Elias, now a skeletal figure, stood before the canvas, holding a glass of solvent. He raised it in a toast to his work. "The unworthy must feed the worthy," he whispered, his eyes fixed on his beautiful painted reflection. He did not drink the solvent. Instead, he painted the final, gruesome detail, a single, thick, wet stroke of black painted across the painted subject's mouth. The moment the black stroke was applied, the painted subject moved. Its eyes narrowed, and its lips stretched into a look of chilling, predatory satisfaction. Clara screamed as the portrait began to shift. The painted self-portrait did not step out of the frame. Instead, the frame, canvas, and painted image began to suck inward, creating a visible vortex of air and shadow. Elias was pulled toward the canvas, not by wind, but by an impossible, hungry vacuum. He screamed, and as he was drawn into the swirling image, the painting surface warped and rippled like liquid flesh. The painted image of Elias smiled wider. Clara was found days later, catatonic. The police found the studio empty, the window intact. The only object remaining was the canvas, hanging perfectly centered on the wall. The painting was no longer a portrait of Elias.
It was a swirling, abstract chaos of flesh tones, black lines, and shadow. But in the exact center, staring out with chilling clarity, was a single, perfectly rendered, realistic human eye. This painting was seized by police and now resides in a private collection. Every curator who has viewed it claims the scent of the room subtly changes to that of fresh, raw meat. Now, let's move to the final story, one that explores the sheer terror of existential breakdown, proving that sometimes the true monster is the world itself. The rural Appalachian woods are a place of forgotten things, but nothing was more terrifying than the staircase. It was a single, meticulously built wooden staircase leading nowhere, rising 20 feet into the dense canopy, ending abruptly in midair. It had been reported for 50 years, always in a different location. The local forestry department sent out surveyor Jack Finley to locate and dismantle the latest appearance. Jack was a man of logic, but standing beneath the towering anomaly, he felt a crushing sense of cosmic wrongness. The wood was unnaturally smooth, and the air around it was silent, void of birdsong or insect noise. He climbed it. At the top, there was no platform, just an end. But as he looked out over the trees, the forest floor seemed to warp, not physically, but geometrically. The trees didn't align correctly. The sun hung at a strange, non-committal angle. Jack realized the staircase was a beacon or a dimensional anchor, and climbing it pulled the immediate area into an adjacent, slightly fractured reality. He hurried down, but when he reached the bottom, his work truck was gone. In its place was an identical truck, but the license plate was rusted, dated 1983, and the dashboard was covered in 40 years of dust. Jack was trapped in a chronal echo. He was now living moments from the past or future, anchored by the staircase. He knew the goal was not to climb the stairs, but to prevent its assembly. He found the tools nearby, ancient, rusted carpentry tools that had been used repeatedly. He started dismantling the staircase, but every time he removed a step, he felt a violent jerk in time. He would suddenly find himself transported to the same spot, but the grass would be taller or shorter, or the trees would be saplings. With each jerk, he heard a faint, repetitive knocking sound emanating from the wood itself. As he reached the last step, the knocking intensified. He paused, placing his ear to the final riser. He realized the knocking wasn't inside the wood. It was the wood knocking back, protesting its destruction. He lifted the final piece of the staircase, and the world snapped back into focus. His original work truck was parked 50 feet away. The forest noise rushed back. The staircase was gone. Jack returned to the office, shaken but safe. 2 weeks later, he noticed a tiny black splinter lodged deep under his thumbnail from the wood. He tried to remove it, but the splinter had become impossibly hard. He took a metal file and worked at it, but only succeeded in making the splinter grow slightly larger and darker. Now, Jack sits alone. The splinter
cannot be removed. Every night he hears a faint, rhythmic knocking sound coming from his thumb, and sometimes, when he holds his hand to the light, he sees a faint wood-grain texture developing on the skin directly above the splinter. This case file was closed due to psychological distress. The final evidence was a photo of a single wooden splinter, a splinter that later vanished from the evidence bag. Which of these tales of the Kronos casket or the Fax News Demon unsettled you the most? Tell us in the comments. And remember, keep your lights on, because the Watchman is still watching.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness